Wonderful. So grateful to be with you this morning. This is so fun. I've loved our previous conversations and getting to know the background and all your work in therapy, sex addiction, seminary formation, human formation. So this is just such a gift that we get to have a recorded conversation now.
I know I was feeling so much joy after our first conversation that I just felt like this had to be fruitful.
Yeah, so good. Well, before we dive into our topic today, I would love to just to hear what is the Lord doing in your life right now?
Well, I think that he's offering a lot of confirmation in prayer, which has been really just so affirming and encouraging. So, a long, long time ago, I've shared this publicly on a couple of podcasts. When the whole McCarrick situation came out, I was very angry at the church. And so I went to church even though I didn't really want to go. I felt so disillusioned. And when I was in prayer, I felt that God was saying, I want you to build an army. To which I said, God, I think you're talking to someone else, so you can go find someone else who will do that for you. But the confirmation, I think, just so many years later, is that God indeed is building an army. I was just at our transitional diaconate ordination service this past weekend, and I just saw the army in real time. And it was just so beautiful because six of our men were ordained transitional deacons. And it wasn't just the number of men, but it was the number of people, lay people that were there supporting them. You could not find an empty seat. People were standing, people were in the overflow section. And you just saw the beauty of the church come to life with all these different cultures, Hispanic cultures, African cultures, Anglo cultures, just all coming. You could see the church in real time, the universal church in real time. And I just thought, this is what God meant. This is the army that he's building now. And so when a lot of people get disillusioned about, oh, we don't have enough priests, I think, look around you. He's calling people left and right from the most unexpected places. We just have to find them and invite
Uh,
them.
uh, so you're just living in some richness right now.
Yeah, we'll
That's
see how long it lasts, but I'm
that's
riding the
so
high.
that's so good. Okay, well, wonderful. Today's in our conversation today, I know we had talked about JP2's writing, and I'm not going to try to say it in Latin, but that I will give you shepherds. And talking about the like modern day barriers that we are seeing in the formation or in like actually being lived out in the priesthood, in the freedom that the Lord has invited. So I would love to hear specifically diving into isolation
Okay.
and from your clinical view and also spiritual view of what you see coming into that area of like what's at risk in isolation in the priesthood.
I honestly believe that isolation in the priesthood has been coming for a long time. I would say that we will be seeing an all-time high here in the next 4 years. And part of the reason for that is because Gen Z is called the most lonely generation. And so right now, Gen Z seminarians, in about 4, 6 years or so, will be ordained priests. And that's where we will see the all-time high. However, in preparation for that, we have also seen increased isolation in millennial priests, which I call the JP2 fervor. And so they kind of went into this vocation after and during the JP2 papacy, and they
Mhm.
were filled with fervor. But what they encountered was not a lot of support because there
Mhm.
was a lot of middle generation priests that were missing. And so we have older priests, middle generation priests missing, and then we have a bunch of the millennial priests. And now we're seeing increased waves of Gen Z priests. And so millennial priests sort of came into the priesthood, stepping into leadership roles very quickly because of a lot of the priests that were present were aging and retiring, and it's just part of life. And so they are experiencing isolation as a result of that because of the lack of just fraternity. Um,
Mhm.
Also, there's some tensions, generational tensions that we see sometimes between millennial priests and what I would call the baby boomer priests, which naturally exist anyway in some of the generation literature, but are probably a lot more acute in the church because they're living in such close quarters. And so that also has led to some mistrust between those two generations and some resulting isolation rather than, bridges being built between them. Now, I'd
Hmm.
say the other just significant factor was COVID. After COVID and during COVID, we saw increased isolation because people were not attending Mass and in the traditional way. And priests were limited in the way that they could administer the sacraments. And so there was a loss of connection. Probably in the aftermath of COVID, we've also seen a little bit of decline in church attendance, and we know that because there's been a decline in funding. And so that has also contributed to some of that isolation that sort of was jump started by COVID.
Hmm. Okay, I haven't actually thought about this, but just in like how you just mapped all of that out, I just like feel this like welling up of like a deep mercy of that like a lot of that isn't anyone's fault. Like
Right,
that, like for
right.
like a priest who's listening to this who is experiencing isolation of like, gosh, what are the factors that are just like around you that isn't of your doing, you know?
Hmm.
And holding that space to be like, oh, I'm sure there's things to own as well, but just the like, has the setup actually been before you out of your control, you know?
Hmm. Yeah, I love that something that Dr. Duckworth said, or I watched one of her interviews recently. She's a researcher on grit and resilience.
Mm,
So Angela Duckworth says that instead of asking what's wrong with me, asking what happened where I needed to react in this way. What were the environmental and societal factors that contributed to me making this choice? And so I
hmm.
love that because it kind of switches the language from a shame based sort of question to a let's take a step back and see it from a bird's eye view. What else was happening here?
Oh, I love that. It also kind of neutralizes it a little bit for you to be able to see it. Oh, that's so
Right.
good. Okay, so if we've like mapped out where isolation has been and kind of generationally, what does it look like? What are kind of some things that would be easy to identify? I feel like sometimes the daily life of the priest is just at such a high pace, where it feels like you're with people all the time. Like, how would you be able to identify isolation, or like what are different ways that that could look like?
Well, I think maybe a simple way is if you find yourself, if you're a priest out there and you find yourself feeling a little bit cold, even though
Mm,
you might be with people, you might feel like you're restraining or not able to give of yourself fully. That would be one example of being isolated in the middle of a bunch of people.
mhm,
Sometimes priests experience sort of this isolation crash. And so, like on a Sunday or like on a feast day or a holy day, they're like super involved at the parish, mass back to back, confession, etc. And then they can come home and they just experience this super overwhelming crash of like, now I don't matter to anyone. Or here I am sitting by myself. I'm exhausted, but I don't even feel like I can pick up the phone and call a friend.
mhm,
And so we want to kind of also be sensitive to that crash, some of it is normal, but it
mhm,
wouldn't be so deep or you wouldn't crash so hard if you weren't going at such great speed during the day. And so I would encourage priests that are finding themselves having an overwhelming crash that really the point of intervention is in the pacing of the day.
hmm,
So if you're able to pace the day, now there's this thing called micro breaks.
mhm.
You need them if you're a priest. We all need them.
Yeah,
This is why I have 15 minutes between sessions because I need a break. And
yeah.
so honoring our need for micro breaks throughout the day so that the crash doesn't hit you as hard.
Hmm. hmm So coldness being so mostly like a disposition to notice as well as an after fact.
Right.
The same. One thing, I don't know if this is something that's come up with people that you've worked with as well, but which this is a fine line, so I don't think there's a black and white answer for this. But the possessiveness over time and energy is like I need to conserve this. So it's a more where you're like a no to everybody. I've noticed that being um a hard place to be. Like, would you name that within isolation? Is that different?
Well, I think it's also a reaction to burnout.
Mm,
So if you've said yes for a long time,
mm,
and you haven't said to other people, and you haven't said yes to yourself, that naturally starts building up resentment.
mhm,
And so, in reaction to that, then you are sometimes quicker to say no.
mhm,
And so, we know from Aristotle, right, virtue lies in the means. And
mhm,
we want to have some self awareness of what that is for you. And
mhm.
we also want to honor the fact that that changes across the lifespan. And so the things that I could say yes to when I was 20
Sure.
or 30 are very different than the things that I may say yes to at 40 something. And
Mhm,
so, sort of, again, honoring those generational shifts, and also that the fact that when we're aging, our body is naturally saying, like, be more selective to what you say yes to
mm,
compensate for the things that you are no longer able to do. And that's sort of a process of maturation. And
mhm,
so, I would kind of encourage that, people that are listening just sort of kind of take into account, do an inventory of what you're saying yes to, what
mhm,
gives you energy and what doesn't give you energy. And some of the things that don't give you energy are sort of necessary parts of your vocation. Okay,
mm,
yes. But if that's overwhelmingly so, that you're saying yes to things that don't give you energy, I want you to see if there's opportunities that, some of those things can be delegated.
mhm,
Like, you don't necessarily have to say yes to everything just because you're in charge. And then I
mhm.
think that will give you more freedom to then evaluate what are the things that you say no to.
Okay, so kind of like an inventory of of what's been going on in light
Yes.
of your current capacity, not
Yes.
yesteryear's capacity or what that could look like. Yeah.
Hmm.
The question that's coming up, and I don't want it to, I want this to like lend to encouragement, but kind of, I'm just like, what's at risk? Because some of these things are like the self-protection, right? The like being cold or being distant or doing these things like the preserving. But like, what would you say is at risk if you keep living that way?
Well, your vocation's at risk.
Mm,
And, well, you can draw conclusions from that. Um,
mhm,
I've seen priests be on the verge of losing their vocation.
mhm,
And so that's a tall order. I also want to validate that all of us are susceptible. If I, as a married woman, say yes to too many things outside of my home that don't prioritize my husband, I could lose my marriage.
mhm,
And so the stakes are high for all of us. Again, I just want to
mhm,
normalize that. Now, before you lose your vocation, there are just a lot of things that you could lose. I mean,
mhm,
your sanity,
mhm,
your work life balance, your connection to God, your connection to the things that you used to enjoy, the
mhm,
things that give you life. You could lose leisure. You
mhm,
could lose friendships. And there's
mhm,
just a lot of things about the human life that you could miss out on. You could lose your health.
mhm,
And right now, the mental health of men in America is not good. The
mhm,
statistics are actually pretty sobering. And
mhm,
so sometimes, as a culture, we don't value masculine mental health as much as we should. And so I just want to, again, honor that we aren't doing a good job of supporting you in your masculine mental health. And
mhm,
so I just want to encourage that if you feel like you have any symptoms of like burnout,
Mhm.
that you just reach out for help. And we don't want to see you in a vocational crisis. We want to prevent that. And so anything that we
Mhm.
can do on the prevention end, I'm all for that.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm grateful that you just said at the beginning of that being like, and this is like for everybody, right?
Yeah.
is the reality of the human experience of what's at risk. So I'm just now thinking any priest who's just heard this and is like, you just named what they were fearful of, right? Of like, if this keeps happening, where will I be, right? Now, like, what encouragement and hope would you offer them for any priest who is experiencing any of this type of like isolation?
Oh, well, if you choose to, obviously, I'm a big advocate for therapy and ongoing mental health support.
Mhm.
Um, if you have a connection with a therapist and establish a long-term connection with them, you can always go back for a tune-up.
Hmm.
I want to validate that that is a normal thing, especially like for me, I work in private practice. I have people that come in for tune-ups all the time, and I've
Hmm.
been tuning them up, or we tune up together for like 10 years. They come
Yeah.
once a month, sometimes they want to come weekly. And so, if you're a priest out there that is experiencing some burnout, some isolation, then go in for a tune up.
Hmm.
Let's normalize that. I would say the second thing is like pick up the phone and maybe start fraternity or restart fraternity. There's a
Mhm.
lot of hope. I think if you recommit to fraternity, recommit to um,
Mhm.
therapy, recommit to your spiritual life, etc., like all the healthy things that you were taught in seminary, hopefully, then
Mhm.
I think that you can really end up with enjoying your priesthood in a
Mhm.
beautiful way, like have a lot of constant moments of consolation. Like, I'm not saying that this life is easy, but
Sure.
you won't be able to do it if you don't have moments of consolation. And so
Mhm.
all we're doing is targeting the isolation so that we can remove some of those barriers to fraternity, to connection to others, to the laity, etc., people at your parish, and then opening up the doors for consolation, but then also just a lot of joy and excitement for your ministry. You can tell the priests who have done the work.
Mhm.
The
Mhm.
before and after of a priest who like addresses isolation is amazing. It's
Mhm.
amazing. And it's actually even more inspiring for the laity to see that transformation in you.
Yes. Oh, it's wonderful. And I just have the heart of just, I'm like, and it's worth it. And it is like, is any priest story. It can be any priest story, right? Of the
Yeah.
like, what I hear you saying of like, yeah, it's never too far gone. And it's like, you're not an exception to the hope and the joy that the Lord wants. I love it.
Yeah.
Gosh, thank you so much. Thank you for taking time and unpacking this. And I really look forward to our future conversations.
Oh, me too.